malfunction, and maybe a premonition, something potentially insightful. And where does this idea of a cognitive hallucination fit in? Things get murky here.
They really do. And to tackle this, we kind of have to step outside the strict clinical definitions for a moment and look at more philosophical or even psychical views of consciousness.
Okay.
This term cognitive hallucination, it's used more, let's say, experientially than clinically. Clinically, it's a bit fuzzy. But what people often mean by it is when you have some kind of intense sensory experience, maybe a true hallucination like flashing lights or sounds, but your mind instantly gives it this profound fixed meaning, a kind of spiritual insight or revelation.
Gnosis.
Exactly. Gnosis is a good word for it. So you have this raw sensory input, maybe chaotic, maybe just strange, a perceptual error, but the mind doesn't just register it as weird sensory data, it immediately weaves it into an unshakable story or truth.
So the feeling, the insight, becomes fixed, even if the initial trigger was just noise.
Pretty much. The sensory event itself might be brief, but the meaning slapped onto it becomes incredibly powerful, fixed, and life-altering. Now, clinically speaking, that resulting gnosis, that absolute certainty about your cosmic mission or whatever, it would still likely be classified as a delusion.
Why?
Because it meets the criteria. It's a fixed belief, often resistant to contradictory evidence, and it's derived from internal cognitive processing, even if triggered by a weird perception.
But the person experiencing it feels like they've tapped into something real, something ultimate.
Absolutely. That's the subjective experience. Think about the classic example, hearing a mushroom speak. You might have an auditory hallucination, you hear a voice that isn't there. That's the perception part.
Okay.
But the crucial thing is the content. If that voice gives you a specific, detailed message like, you are the chosen one, you must deliver this message to save humanity, and you become utterly convinced of that mandate.
Then the belief in the message is the cognitive hallucination, or the delusion.
Right. The sound is the hallucination. The unshakable belief in your mission, derived from that sound, is the delusion, or what some might call the cognitive hallucination. It's a tricky line, but the core is the belief's rigidity against reason.
So if the rational mind can produce these fixed, false beliefs, is it just broken? Or is it maybe, I don't know, working too hard to keep something else out? This brings us to that idea of the brain as a reducing valve, doesn't it?
It does. It's a different way of thinking about consciousness. Instead of the brain creating consciousness, maybe it filters it.
Filters reality. But why would we evolve to limit our perception of reality? Seems like seeing more would be better for survival.
Well, the theory goes that the filter is actually essential for survival, to prevent us from being completely, utterly overwhelmed with the experience of the entire universe simultaneously. Yeah, the idea is that baseline reality is just too much, flooded with information, connections, data across time and space. The filter screens out almost all of this accurate mapping information, this credible biological sense perception, because it's just not relevant or helpful for navigating the immediate physical world and, not starving or getting eaten. It simplifies things down to a manageable consensus reality.
So normal consciousness is actually a highly edited version of reality.
According to this view, yes. And this is where psychedelics come into the picture. LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca. The theory is that these substances act to temporarily turn off the filter, or at least dial it way down.
Allowing access to, mind at large.
That's the term Aldous Huxley used, yeah. Access to a much wider range of perceptions and information that the filter usually blocks. And this is where things like pre-cognition, premonitions, ESP start to potentially fit in.
Because the filter isn't blocking that information anymore.
Potentially. It links back to really ancient practices, too. Think about shamanic traditions. For millennia, cultures have used altered states, drumming, dancing, psychoactive plants specifically to try and step outside normal time and space, bypass the filter, and bring back useful information. Knowledge about the future, about distant events, healing insights.
Is there actual evidence for this filter bypass idea?
Well, the sources point to some compelling stuff, like the chemists who first isolated the active compounds in the ayahuasca vine called them telepathy alkaloids.
Seriously?
Telepathy.
Yep.
Because the early explorers kept reporting getting accurate news about things happening far away while under its influence, stuff they couldn't possibly have known otherwise that later turned out to be true.
Huh.
And then there's the early psychedelic therapy research. Stanislav Grof and others reported their patients routinely experiencing things like ESP, seeing future events accurately, having out-of-body experiences, even accurate remote viewing seeing places distant in space and time.
On a daily basis.
That's what they reported, yeah. And surveys of recreational users seem to back this up too. Significantly higher rates of reported telepathy, like up to 83% in one cannabis survey and pre-cognition, maybe 21% in another study, among psychedelic users compared to people using, say, alcohol or cocaine.
So it seems specific to substances that might affect this filter.
The correlation is definitely suggestive. It implies the sober, functional brain might actively suppress access to this kind of...
Which makes a filter seem almost like a prison, not just a tool. But okay, let's get back to the listener's specific question. How does trauma, or being intensely focused on the present, stop someone from seeing the future, from having these premonitions?
Okay, this connects to the brain's default mode network, the DMN. Think of the DMN as your brain's internal narrator and planner.
The part that thinks about me, my past, my future.
Exactly. Self-reflection, remembering the past, simulating future scenarios, planning, worrying, and really importantly, rumination. When your mind is just churning over thoughts, especially negative ones.
So if you're stuck in a loop of rumination, going over past hurts, worrying about future threats, planning how to cope, the DMN is highly active.
Precisely. That kind of internal, complex, narrative-heavy thinking keeps the DMN buzzing. And the DMN is, in a sense, the core of that rational filter. It keeps us locked into our personal story, our linear timeline.
Okay.
Now, the sources suggest that accessing states like precognition, stepping outside of linear time, seems to happen when DMN activity goes down, drastically down.
How does that happen?
Well, one way might be through overwhelming the senses. Some researchers think the intense geometric patterns people see in altered states might engage the visual cortex so heavily that it clamps the brain in place, basically shutting down the DMN's ability to spin its usual narratives.
It stops the inner monologue.
Sort of, yeah. It prevents the brain from thinking its usual thoughts, potentially opening a door to something else.
So trauma. If trauma means you're constantly hypervigilant, processing intense emotions, replaying past events, worrying about immediate safety,
then your DMN is likely running in overdrive. Right. All that complex rumination, that focus on past pain and present threat, keeps the network highly active.
and that active DMN keeps the filter firmly in place.
That's the idea. Trauma essentially forces your attention onto survival in the here and now, or processing the then and there. It keeps the rational narrative engine firing on all cylinders. And that active filter, necessary for dealing with the perceived immediate crisis, effectively blocks access to those more subtle, non-local, time-transcendent states where something like precognition might occur.
So basically, you're too busy trying to survive the present and process the past to turn off the filter and glimpse the future.
That's a good way to put it. The filter is doing its primary job, survival focus, and trauma kicks that job into high gear, locking out the extras.
Okay, that actually provides a perfect way to think about the collective level. We've seen how delusion works for an individual, right? Stan creates Stamperatu to simplify a complex internal problem like insecurity. Now, let's take that same mechanism and apply it to the listener's idea about the mist.
Right, the hypothesis that the monsters weren't real aliens, but a manifestation of the townspeople's collective shadow, their own darkness projected outward.
And the ending, with the army arriving. Maybe they weren't there for monsters, but because the people inside the supermarket had completely lost it, descended into violent chaos, all while being convinced they were fighting external creatures.
Psychoanalytically, that reading makes a lot of sense. It lines up perfectly with how the shadow works. Remember, Stanferatu was explicitly called Stan's insecurities, real nasty dude.
The repressed stuff, the dark side.
Exactly. So the idea here is that the mist and the creatures within it become this huge shared screen onto which the entire community projects its own fears, prejudices, insecurities, and capacity for violence.
It gives them a single external enemy to focus on.
Which serves a critical psychological function, escaping
Yeah.
accountability. It's much, much easier to unite against a terrifying external monster than it is to confront the terrifying reality of your own community's internal breakdown, your own neighbors turning on each other, your own capacity for brutality.
So they frame themselves as victims fighting for survival.
Instead of acknowledging they might be the source of the real danger, the violence becomes justified as necessary self-defense against the other, the monster.
This sounds exactly like Stan's delusion, but on a mass scale. It's a shared delusion.
Absolutely. A fixed, false belief. We are under attack by inhuman monsters. that allows them to rationalize increasingly irrational and violent actions.
And just like with Stanferatu stealing the peas, the actual reality inside the supermarket, the breakdown of order, the rise of zealotry, the murders gets ignored or misinterpreted.
Right. The observable evidence is that their society is collapsing from within. People are turning on each other. Mrs. Carmody is whipping up religious hysteria. But the shared conviction, the delusion, insists the problem is out there, in the mist. It overrides the immediate, verifiable, internal reality.
Because fighting a monster is simpler than facing your own community's darkness.
Much simpler. And think about the atmosphere in the movie. That oppressive, grotesque, nightmarish feeling. It mirrors Stanferatu's disturbing comments, doesn't it? Like that line about the donkey's prolapsed anus follows you wherever you go.
Ugh, yeah. Chilling and bizarre.
It's the language of psychological horror, of internal turmoil made manifest. The atmosphere feels like madness because, in this reading, it is madness.
And remember how Stan, when he started seeing Tuttle in the TV, found someone else who believed him? The guy who said, "We're the same now, two men obsessed. It's like I'm looking in a mirror."
Yes, that validation is key. Finding someone else who shares your break from reality reinforces it, makes it feel more real.
That's exactly what happens in the supermarket, isn't it? Mrs. Carmody finds followers, the fear becomes contagious, the delusion gets amplified by the group dynamic.
Precisely. It creates a shared psychological space where the madness isn't just individual, it's confirmed, validated, and becomes the operating system for the group.
And this shared delusion, it must feel powerful, right? Like it gives them permission to act.
It offers the illusion of control, of righteous action. But the sources warn about this kind of thing. Committing to that fixed, false belief becomes a kind of prison defined by fixed, false beliefs.
How so?
Because by focusing all their energy on the external illusion, the monsters in the mist, they guarantee their own destruction from the internal reality they're ignoring. Their pursuit of safety from the external threat leads directly to the internal chaos that consumes them. It's like the Tantalus myth you mentioned, reaching for something that ensures your suffering.
So if the army shows up at the end simply because of the human chaos, the murders, the breakdown inside, that fits perfectly. The external world finally intervenes not because of aliens, but because the human delusion ran its destructive course.
Exactly. It confirms that the internal collective madness was the real driving force of the tragedy.
Okay, so if we buy this idea that the town's madness was internal, collective, the next question is, how did it happen so fast? How does a group of ordinary people in a supermarket flip into a murderous mob seemingly overnight?
Well, this is where network science gives us some, frankly, terrifying insights into the mechanics of how ideas, even delusional ones, spread.
Network science, how does that apply?
It comes down to how social networks are structured. You've probably heard of the small world problem, right? 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, the idea that we're all connected through just a few people.
Right. But the weird thing is, our immediate social networks are usually highly clustered. Think about Bridgeton, Maine. Your close friends probably know each other, your neighbors know each other, lots of tight local groups.
Okay, it seems stable.
You'd think high clustering should make it hard for things to spread far and wide quickly. Information should stay stuck in local clusters. But research shows something fascinating. You only need to add a tiny number of random, long-range connections, shortcuts between these clusters.
And what happens?
And the entire network immediately behaves like a small world. Information can suddenly jump across the whole system incredibly fast. Stability vanishes.
Wow, just a few random links.
A surprisingly small number. And this hypersensitive connectivity, it's the network's Achilles heel. It's why airport delays can cascade globally, why diseases can spread like wildfire, and why ideas, good or bad, true or false, sane or mad, can suddenly ignite across a population almost instantly.
Okay, so back to the supermarket in the mist. Before the mist hits, you've got a collection of these local clusters. Neighbors, coworkers, families, relatively stable.
Exactly. Then the mist descends, and suddenly you get these shortcuts. They're not physical roads, they're psychological or ideological connections.
Like what?
Well, think about Dan Miller bursting in terrified, warning about something monstrous out there. That raw fear itself acts as a shortcut, instantly connecting previously separate individuals through a shared overwhelming emotion. Terror bypasses normal social barriers.
Okay, that's one shortcut. What else?
The really potent one, arguably, is Mrs. Carmody's religious zealotry. She becomes a kind of psychological hub.
Wow.
She offers a simple, powerful, delusional narrative. This is God's wrath, we must sacrifice. This narrative acts like a super fast shortcut, connecting all the different frightened clusters, the rational folks, the scared folks, the confused folks, into a single unified fanatical belief system centered on her.
She links everyone through fear and a simplistic, albeit terrifying, explanation.
Precisely. Her zealotry bypasses reasoned argument and local pockets of doubt, spreading the madness rapidly through the network she creates. It simplifies the terrifying ambiguity of their situation into a concrete, albeit horrifying, plan of action based on a fixed false belief.
And the network science predicts this can happen incredibly fast.
Yes. There are simulations, often using things like the prisoner's dilemma game, that model cooperation and defection in networks. And they show something stunning. You don't even need to change the people involved, their basic rationality or willingness to cooperate. Just by changing how they're connected, by introducing these kinds of shortcuts or influential hubs promoting defection or panic, you can flip an entire system from cooperation to chaos, nastiness, and betrayal almost instantly.
So the structure itself makes the rapid descent possible.
It suggests it's almost inevitable once the psychological shortcuts appear. Even if most people started out wanting to be reasonable, the network structure allows the infection of fear and delusion, championed by a hub like Carmody, to overwhelm the system incredibly quickly.
That really strengthens the collective shadow idea. The town's collapse wasn't necessarily supernatural, it was structurally predictable, given the right trigger and the right network dynamics. The internal reality, amplified by the network, caused the destruction.
That's what the model suggests, yeah. The madness spreads because the connections allow it, even demand it, once ignited. #outro.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered some ground. From Stan Smith believing in Stanforatu and seeing Tuttle in the static, all the way to how a whole town, in a story like The Mist, could potentially fall into a collective, self-destructive delusion.
Yeah, we've seen the core difference. Delusion as that fixed belief, hallucination as the false perception, and how the mind might handle stuff outside the norm, maybe as a clinical breakdown, or maybe as that filter being bypassed, potentially letting in things like premonitions.
And the big takeaway, whether it's Stan or the town in the supermarket, seems to be this pattern. Looking for a simple, external cause for chaos as a way to avoid facing complex, difficult internal realities.
Right. The delusion simplifies things. It offers a clear enemy, a clear narrative, even if that narrative leads you right off a cliff. It's a retreat from the overwhelming complexity of insecurity or fear or collective guilt.
And that philosophical idea looms large too, the brain as a reducing valve, constantly filtering out most of reality just to keep us functioning day to day.
Keeping us sane, keeping us focused on the linear path.
So that leaves us and you with a final thought to chew on. If your brain is built to filter out the entire universe, screening reality to let in only what's needed for practical survival, what crucial information, what accurate mapping data about your world, your relationships, maybe even your own potential future are you filtering out right now?
What are you not seeing just to maintain that sense of normalcy, that functional sanity?
And connecting back to trauma and the DMN, if you find yourself deeply caught up in ruminating about past pains or consumed by anxieties about the immediate future,
keeping that internal narrator running at full speed.
Are you, perhaps by definition, reinforcing the filter? Are you potentially blocking your own ability to perceive signals or possibilities that lie beyond that immediate loop of fear and survival? Does focusing too hard on the present trauma trap you there?
Something to think about the filters we use, knowingly or unknowingly.
Definitely. Mull that over until the next deep dive.